Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Laura Paxton, and I'm the Wildscreen Network Manager. Throughout May, you may be aware that Wildscreen is proud to have been focusing our webinars and networking on supporting emerging talent. Wildscreen Emerging Talent aims to empower and support the filmmakers and storytellers of the future through delivering support programs, schemes, and webinars. It focuses on elevating key barriers to entry into the industry by providing industry insight, support, and advice on getting started. Launched in 2021, Wildscreen Emerging Talent seeks to empower and support the filmmakers and storytellers of the future through delivering support programs, schemes, talks, and opportunities and webinar. This year-round program focuses on the key barriers and industry support, providing getting started and insight into the natural history, film and TV industry. So far, we have delivered 5 webinars through the program and connected 22 individuals from underrepresented groups to the industry professionals through Screen Skills and the Wildscreen Emerging Talent Mentorship Scheme. We've got some exciting new schemes coming up this year, including internship opportunities, and sign up to the Emerging Talent newsletter to be the first to hear about these. A link will be sent round after the webinar for anyone wanting information on this. So back to today's webinar. We will be discussing the topic of hyperlocal storytelling. As everybody knows, natural world stories are happening all around us. Whether you live in one of the most renowned wildlife regions in the world, a busy city or a small town, nature can be found in some form on your doorstep. Telling the stories which are unfolding in your local area is crucial to understanding the global picture and how our shared natural world is changing. Now more than ever, it is important that we share these stories and examine the power of hyperlocal storytelling. I'm thrilled to be joined by 3 wonderful speakers this afternoon. Firstly, we have Laura Pennafort. Laura is a biologist and wildlife filmmaker. Born in Brazil and now based in the UK, she has collaborated with the local organisations in her home country to shine a light in conservation stories about Brazil's wetlands, endangered species and climate change. We're also joined by Natalie Clements. Natalie worked as a camera operator and self-shooting producer director in television for over 10 years. Her passion for wildlife and conservation has enabled her to work with zookeepers, conservationists and NGOs on groundbreaking conservation projects as a self-shooting DP. Most recently, Natalie has worked as a camera operator on various high-profile television series, including BBC Springwatch. And finally, we have Will Clothier. Will is a shooting natural history researcher with field experience in African big game reintroduction, management and research. He has an MA in wildlife filmmaking and is a wildlife conservation graduate from the Durrell Institute of Conservation and Ecology. And he most recently directed a film entitled Pete the Pond, which was a celebration of one man's mission to restore part of his local countryside to its former glory. So welcome all of you, and thank you so much for joining us to talk about how natural world filmmaking is evolving and the local stories that are becoming increasingly important. How are you all doing today?
Very well.
Really well. Thank you so much for having us.
So today's webinar will discuss the following topics. Firstly, the power of local storytelling and how spotlighting hyperlocal stories can contribute to the global conversation on climate and biodiversity. Also looking at the importance of smaller local stories, more relatable, part of every day, all nature is amazing, and just focusing on that. And then also just some kind of tips and tricks. Tips and tricks on how to document local stories. There will be a short Q&A at the end of the webinar, so please feel free to pop any questions you have for our speakers in the Q&A box down at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we will get to them at the end. So first of all, I thought it would be a good idea to look at the kind of broader picture and why it is more than ever to focus on the incredible stories that are happening all around us. So I will open this out to all of our speakers. And the first question that I'd kind of like to discuss with you all is, what stories have you told recently, or local stories that you've worked on that you would like to discuss? So if I go to Laura first.
Yeah, so my most recent short documentary I filmed in Brazil's wetlands, very close to my hometown. and I kind of touched on the biodiversity that you can find there and collaborated with local organizations, NGOs that have been doing lots of conservation work there. And the main thing I focused on my film were the wildfires that happen in the area and how these organizations have had volunteers that participated in animal rescues to try and save the lives of the animals that were injured by the fires. So yeah, that's the project I was working on.
Amazing. And Natalie?
Yeah, so currently I'm actually working on, I'm filming a bit tomorrow, local project with a guy who has built over the years kind of 5,000 bird boxes. He's got about 500 in a field at the moment, and his mission is to help kind of bolster some migrating species, so redstart and pied flycatcher, small birds from Africa, and barn owls. So he's kind of contributing locally to his thing, but also has a global reach through something that just started as a hobby as a child, and is now, you know, he has a bigger impact on the world. So it's nice to do.
Amazing. And then Will?
Yeah, I just finished filming with a man called Pete the Pond down in Eastbourne near Brighton. The film primarily is about a man that builds wildlife ponds, but sort of through Pete's eyes, you explore things like the biodiversity crisis, climate anxiety, people's increasing disconnects with the natural world, all those kinds of things. Yeah, it's been good.
Very cool. So why do you all feel that it's important to focus on kind of smaller everyday stories and species? Just kind of put that out to, let's go to Natalie first on this one.
Coming from kind of a non-science kind of community, I quite often find that local people don't always know what's on their doorstep. And so being able to shine a light on the small things that are happening and the species that they know are around them and they care about, but they might not necessarily know how to interact with them or how to help them. It kind of really helps kind of putting these stories out there in a human kind of way to be able to inspire local people to feel responsible for their surroundings.
Yeah, definitely. And I imagine that kind of links quite well onto you, Will, with the Pete the Pond, because that was the kind of where it came from with the film, wasn't it? The fact that he wanted to kind of showcase, and it was a lifetime's work for him to support that.
Yeah, exactly. I think, you know, often when we're talking about, like, you know, the biodiversity crisis and all those really far-reaching issues, I think it's quite easy to discount how much of a role local storytelling has in that. And I think Pete was sort of a perfect example of that, in that, you know, it makes it a lot more relatable and easier to engage with, and it makes, you know, a lot of those really big issues seem a lot more manageable. So I think, you know, local storytelling shouldn't be discounted. And then as well, I think when you're starting out, I think more than anything, just access and convenience to local stories is just such a useful thing to go through. So yeah, it's a really worthwhile thing doing.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good point. The fact that not everybody, when they're starting out, has the kind of kit to go off and film something in Africa or somewhere kind of further afield. And I think it's so easy and accessible just to, especially now with kind of phone cameras, as they're not going to be the tech spec that obviously a lot of the equipment is, but it's something that's accessible and you can go out and have it on you and just film something really easily. So yeah. And then also, so Laura, in terms of kind of growing up in Brazil and then coming over to the UK, you've got kind of two different sides of local storytelling effectively.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel like I agree with what Natalie and Will both said about looking at kind of like your doorstep to these really local stories, because it's something that people sometimes overlook, especially getting in this industry. You often look at what's on the other side of the world because it looks more interesting somehow, but it is, yeah, you can definitely find these local stories. In my case, my home is Brazil, so it is a bit far from here, but yeah, it is just finding these local people, I feel like when you get contributors in, you often get these people that are really passionate about something, and something can be, you know, any kind of animal species. And when you get these people involved in documentaries, I also feel like they often have a lot to say about conservation and about species that might not be the most charismatic ones, but then when they develop this connection, it can also help the person watching the documentary to establish this connection as well with something that, you know, a species that they wouldn't otherwise have connected with. So I think just talking to locals as well is really, really important for that.
Yeah, I think if I was to say, following on from that, I think a big part of that, I guess, is the relatability of local characters. Like you say, like, you know, local stories, local people and characters have that ability to engage people with something they wouldn't normally want to engage with. Yeah.
That leads on nicely to the kind of next
absolutely.
question, in terms of, do you get, when you are kind of out filming and looking at things, do you get an interaction or a reaction from locals? I imagine, Natalie, you do quite a bit if you're doing kind of spring watch, or what are they filming, or what are they doing, and are people engaged in that, or are they just being nosy?
Quite often people are curious to know what's being filmed, and then when you do kind of talk about it, they're either excited or interested, or they've got a story to tell, and or you know, they've had a sighting, or they can give you kind of insights on where to look and where to go for things. So yeah, so kind of local interactions are yeah, really nice things to have. On the other side of it, though, there is a responsibility to try not to be too obvious, because you can create crowds and things. So yeah, local kind of chats and things are super great, but there is also that awareness, you know, try not to shout too much about it, but get people excited at the same time.
And the same with sort of Laura and Will. Did you feel that when you've filmed various projects, do you get a kind of reaction or engagement from the communities with the filming that you've been doing?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't got a lot of, I've not had a lot of experience of people coming up to you after filming, but in terms of, I guess, people's engagement with something, yeah, I think when I've like screened the film, for example, I think what I've seen through like local stories and local characters is that there's a lot more scope for actually engaging people to do something and having that kind of impact. So like, for example, to use Peter Pond as an example, you know, when I did a screening here in Bristol a couple of months ago, one of my friends heard someone walking out of the theatre, and they said to their partner, you know, can we go home and build a pond this weekend? And I think, you know, if you're telling some huge scale story, you're not necessarily going to have that direct impact on someone to do something. So that, I think that's just a perfect example of, you know, how that, you know, direct link with a character can actually engage people far more.
Yeah, definitely, and especially when they're doing something that is accessible.
I was going to say that.
Like, carry on, Laura.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say I haven't had many reactions on location as well, but after the film is done, and even sort of like using social media to kind of spread the word about what I've been filming and stuff. I had lots of replies from people that are from that area and that were just really excited about how that, you know, the biodiversity there that is often kind of overlooked compared to, like, you know, the Amazon, because my film was in the wetlands, which is in the central part of Brazil, and that's not as talked about, I guess. And people were just very excited to see that local biodiversity sort of portrayed in a documentary like that, and even kind of translated onto, you know, brought to an English speaking audience and just kind of spreading the words about the wildfires and things. So I got yeah, a lot of people having this kind of reaction of just, you know, being happy that a local story was kind of, you know, a local or the local biodiversity and the stories of these organizations that I've collaborated with. And even the organizations themselves were kind of happy that things were being kind of brought over to a different part of the world, I guess.
I think as well, like on the other side of it, the organizations that we kind of work with and talk to, seeing an audience reaction that's like really positive often gives them kind of confidence to do more and to maybe raise their voice a little bit more, you know, using video or using social platforms. So it's nice to see that side of things as well.
Yeah, at the end of my film, I also put like a link to the organization. It's called Empower, which is the where the volunteers that did the animal rescues and everything were part of that, and it's all self-funded. So it's also just good to have that kind of exposure and, you know, kind of use that emotional connection that you've helped the viewers to develop in the film to kind of then, you know, maybe get them to donate to this organization so they can keep doing what they're doing, or just get exposure. Really, I think it's also a good thing for local organizations.
Yeah, definitely. And then in terms of what the kind of audiences engage with, I think, you know, historically it's always been kind of the big five, or it's been that kind of 6 o'clock in the evening slot on a Sunday afternoon, and we've been driven by that. But that's definitely seen a change over the last sort of 5 or so years. And have you seen that kind of specific species people are more engaged with when you're kind of filming, or then if it's kind of smaller things, they're like, oh, I'm not worried about that, or if there's just a general engagement with the kind of filming or whatever the natural world you're focusing on?
Yeah, I think people engage with characters, don't they, whether that be human or animal. And yeah, I think it's increasingly people obviously very disconnected from these things. Like we all know that, you know, if we're going to talk about things like the biodiversity crisis or the climate crisis, that, you know, people in the global south are going to be the ones most heavily hit by that. And people are so disconnected from that sometimes. And I think sort of having that intimate insight into someone's character can be a way of really sort of humanizing those kinds of stories and getting people to understand why they should care. So it certainly has that role. And I think more than anything, like, we know that people engage more with stories based around hope than doom and gloom and despair. And I think that's something that sort of as an industry we're starting to latch onto, but something that we really need to do more, I think. Obviously it has its time and place, but yeah.
I think it helps sometimes filming species that are around you all the time, but you don't really kind of, you might not think about, and seeing something that kind of shows you a bit more about them makes you think, oh, I want to know more about the wildlife around me. I did like a little video on pied wagtails. They're all over our retail parks. And as I was filming it, everyone was like, why are you filming those? I see them every day. What are they? Tell me more about it. And that kind of ended in them kind of in Christmas trees and reasons why they roost in certain places in the winter. And it just inspired people to go, oh, that's what that is. I kind of want to know a bit more. And yeah, that's just lovely.
So if you don't mind, to follow on from that, I think in my own experience, I've had that firsthand, in that I think growing up, I've been very guilty myself of only more so being interested in, you know, things far away on the other side of the world. But it's just through, you know, filming with Pete the Pond, his sort of innate love for the world around him and passion for the small things that we all walk past a lot of the time has made me like properly reappreciate those kinds of things as well. And if you can do that for, you know, a filmmaker, then obviously you can do that for an audience as well. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about how you tell the story as well. Like us as filmmakers, it's how you get, you know, an animal or a character, a human character, and then how you tell their story and their experience. In the wetlands, I feel like the jaguars are obviously like the most charismatic kind of animals, and I didn't want to make a film around the jaguars because of that. I was like, I don't want to go sort of, you know, obvious and just use that charismatic figure to get people, interested in the bigger issue. And my contributors had quite an emotional bond with the tapirs, because they were the animals that were the hardest to rescue, because they're quite big and they just, they burn their paws very easily because they're very heavy. And it's just really hard to kind of rescue these animals. So they had all these sort of horror stories, and they were just very connected to them. And they had 3 baby tapirs that were that lost their moms in the fires, and then they were taking care of that because one of them is a vet, and they were just sort of taking care of trying to make sure that they grew healthy to then be reintroduced into the wild. That also brings that element of hope that we was talking about. And I feel like when you find these stories that is like people that are very passionate and have that connection to an animal, and then I feel like you can make any kind of species interesting, and you can get a whole audience interested in that species as well, when there's this emotional connection.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think having the kind of emotional attachment to these stories and telling, because everyone's going to have a different interest in different, once they get out there, and kind of local wildlife that's on different doorsteps, even in the UK, will differ from the north to the south, whether it's on the coast, whether you live kind of inland. And so it's all about kind of just having access and being able to tell whatever stories are close to you. So yeah, it's really important to kind of do that. So we'll just kind of move on now, and then we'll just kind of focus on the projects that you guys have been working on or worked on previously, and just kind of focusing on those. So Laura, in terms of kind of the films that you've put together, obviously coming from Brazil, local language, has having the kind of local language made it more accessible? And do you feel it highlights why local people should be empowered to tell these stories? And how do these kind of local stories contribute to sort of global conversations about biodiversity and sort of the health of nature?
Yeah, so I feel like it's definitely an advantage to speak the local language when you're doing something like this, or like working with contributors, especially because I had 2 contributors in my film. One of them could speak some English and the other one couldn't at all. And I tried to conduct the first interview with the one that could speak English, who was Eduarda, the woman. And we did the first half in English, and she was trying to kind of explain some, animal facts and just about the biome in general. And then she asked me to switch to Portuguese so that she could explain better the problem of it, like the wildfires and how that all unfolded, because she was more comfortable explaining like something more complex, for example, in her native language. So I feel like, yeah, and I could definitely tell a difference from, her trying to kind of, get around with speaking English, to then switching to Portuguese, and she could tell so much more detail. She could be more spontaneous and just really tell, everything, and there was no language barrier there. So I feel like that was definitely an advantage for me, being a filmmaker and conducting this interview and just being able to get all these details. So yeah, and I also feel like when people can speak their own language, it also gives that sense of empowerment that you were talking about, of just being able to bring everything to the table. And then I managed to obviously translate everything and just do all the subtitles, and then being as accurate as I could to then bring it to an English speaking audience. And then that also just kind of got me thinking how many conservation heroes have like beautiful stories around the world that aren't really told because they can't speak English, or because they can't communicate with other filmmakers, or their stories just kind of get lost. It was just the thought that I had whilst I was doing my film, because I wouldn't have all of these advantages if I chose to do it somewhere else. Obviously you can get translators and all of that to tell the stories in a more accurate way, but I think it was definitely good to kind of be able to use my local language as to tell the story in the details.
I think following on from language as well, I think it works both ways as well, doesn't it? In that so often in terms of impact, like films are made and they're obviously distributed around the world, but often not in the language native to where they were filmed. And that's always just such an issue that often just means that the very people that perhaps could have so much influence on what it is you're trying to communicate aren't able to watch these things. And it's something that we obviously really have to address and get better at as an industry, is making sure that we do have sort of local language versions of these things as well, rather than just flying in and getting what we need then leaving.
Yes, yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of, if you're doing a film screening, make sure there's kind of one organized with the kind of community that you've kind of worked with, obviously in their kind of language. It's no point just doing the final cut and they're like, oh, it looks great, the video that you've got. Yeah, so no, definitely. I think that a lot of kind of key and interesting points raised, and the kind of the lost in translation, there's so much that you will lose, and so there's kind of bits that you'll kind of pick up, but yeah, you want to be able to tell the kind of whole story, so it's always useful having that kind of language there.
Yeah, I feel like that's also a good sort of tip for emerging talent, really. If you do speak another language, then definitely use that to your advantage, because chances are you'll have kind of access to stories that lots of people won't. If you just, you know, speak to local people and all of that, you can definitely get some good stories, original stories that no one will have thought of before.
Yeah, definitely. So moving on to Natalie, in terms of kind of projects you've worked on, what do you feel is the importance of kind of communicating and engaging whilst being slightly discreet to protect the wildlife? And what have you kind of personally learned from shooting the stories from a kind of non-science based background?
Yeah, so the importance of kind of raising kind of conservation stories, but also trying to be discreet is one of those things that kind of to and fro between. Quite often you want people to obviously know that things are that creatures are where they are, things are happening, but also that you keep them safe. So you have a responsibility as a filmmaker to make sure you don't raise locations and kind of let people know too much about things. So that's been kind of something to juggle, and something that I was quite new to when I started. And you know, you learn very quickly kind of if you make too much of a scene, then people can kind of go into a space that an animal needs to exist in. So it's always kind of on the forefront of your mind to try and be responsible, but also let the locals know that there is something there that needs to be protected, or that they need to care for. And quite often the result of creating the content means that people do feel more responsible, and they do have more of an interest, and maybe they start volunteering more, or get more involved in things. So the positive outcome is always the goal, but yeah, it's always paired with kind of a responsibility on a local level as well. In terms of like the non-science background, learning how to communicate with scientists is something that I hadn't really had much experience in. So I've always found kind of local storytelling to be an accessible way for me to learn more of the language, more of the issues that species are facing that maybe I don't know about, and also to be able to take that and kind of interpret it in a way that I understand viewers can connect with. So even though science is ridiculously helpful, and it's always, a lot of people have always felt, you know, you need to have that to do this job, there are ways of kind of working around it and figuring out, you know, how do I learn the language, how do I do that? You know, quite often, you know, go away after interviewing someone, read up on things, and yeah, just kind of envelop yourself in that world. It is actually possible. I know a lot of people think it's not, but it totally is.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's kind of different ways in, and I think that's the good thing, and that's the whole point of kind of what we're trying to do with kind of emerging talent. We're very aware that it's not as easy for everybody to go down the kind of science or kind of university and route, and so it's different ways in and learning and how you can kind of develop that. So it's kind of learning different stories from different people and building on that. So now also over to Will, and in terms of kind of your work with Pete, did you feel that he built a kind of sense of community with you? And did he share his knowledge and kind of insider tips? And did you find that the film allowed people to engage with their own local biodiversity? And it has connecting to stories in your area made you feel differently about your insight into the kind of climate and biodiversity crisis? Sorry, quite a lot to unpick there. So pick and choose which you want to look into.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Pete gave me a lot of his time, which was great. I think if anything, it highlighted two things to me. One being that it's so important to spend time with contributors without a camera when you're telling these local stories. I think it really does help you a lot moving forward in terms of, you know, getting their trust and helping them tell their story in the way they want it to be told. Because obviously, you know, I'm sure we'll all agree that filmmaking is, in essence, quite annoying sometimes for people. I think it's important we don't forget that. But I think, yeah, my time with him has also just sort of reminded me how much like power individuals still have to do things. So his main thing is sort of how much potential we all have in our back gardens, or, you know, whatever land we have, to give something back to nature. I always use the same example that he gave me of when he plants a pond with plants, within 3 years, he can find those same plants within ponds within like a 5-mile radius. So in other words, you could build a pond the size of, you know, a quality street in your back garden, and you'd be having an influence on the local biodiversity within miles. So I think that just reminded me that, you know, we shouldn't necessarily underestimate how sort of powerful it is to engage people with things they can do on their doorstep right at home. And yeah, that would probably be my main takeaway from Pete.
Sorry, just trying to unmute myself. Yeah, no, I think it's really good. And I think his whole kind of story and ethos was a really good one to kind of focus. And yeah, you don't need massive kind of land, or it's just kind of small, and it can be local. So it's really important for that. So now, in terms of kind of top tips, people are always kind of looking for advice and kind of how any kind of guidance in terms of storytelling. So Laura, what would be your kind of top tips for someone wanting to find out about kind of local stories and how they can get involved, and the sort of first steps that you would maybe suggest?
I think researching is definitely a good first step. Just, you know, looking, in my case, because I was talking about an event that happened, the wildfires, I read so many news articles, just like everything that was out there about what happened in 2020, and then also use social media to your advantage, because that actually helped me quite a lot to just find people and connect, that initial kind of contact you have with people that I actually found in the research articles, reading them, you know, who was involved in what, and then I would just try and find a contact or like an email, or even their, you know, find them on social media, and then just chat to people until you find the right person, because then lots of people are happy to just, you know, jump in a call with you and just tell you about what they've experienced, and then from that you can just kind of trace it to, you know, another person that did something else for that, and then who was responsible for organizing this. So yeah, it's kind of like an investigation really, when you're trying to find the right person to tell a story. So yeah, definitely lots of research, social media for contributors. I think that would be my tip for that.
Oh, definitely. I think social media has definitely got its benefits now to be able to kind of reach out to people and just, yeah, try your luck with a lot of people as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so Natalie, as we've kind of mentioned previously, not coming from the science background, how would you suggest that people kind of approach these stories without coming from that sort of background?
So when I started really getting into wildlife, I just spent so much time in my local reserves chatting to bird watchers, photographers, kind of you know, the keepers of the spaces that I was kind of in, and just trying to kind of just take everything in as much as possible. So time in nature absolutely is the biggest thing, and it's the one thing that everyone always tell you, you know, spend more time outside. So yeah, and in terms of kind of just finding stories, that was kind of general conversations and chats and learning kind of what's interesting to people, and you know, and what's kind of what's not as kind of interesting, but that there might be elements of other things that kind of make people's ears prick. So it's really useful for that. And then just using social media, small Facebook groups of specific species or little bits local to your area. There's so many groups of you know, there's pockets of where I live where there's a couple of reserves, and there's people that just talk on those groups, and just getting involved in conversations and finding out what really excites people has been the most beneficial for me.
Yeah, definitely. And then, Will, in terms of kind of what do people need to be aware of? Obviously, it's the kind of getting that importance of, you don't want to kind of disturb wildlife in their kind of natural habitats, kind of doing the research and finding that time of year. But when you're kind of doing your research, are there any kind of tips or insights that you could give people?
Yeah, I think obviously all that research in terms of, you know, Googling things and reading books is all really important, and you need to do it, and it's, you know, it's really essential in, you know, in terms of not disturbing things and making sure that you're trying to film at the right time of year, for example. But I think there's also just no replacement for picking up the phone and speaking to people, because just, you know, the same species in two places is going to behave completely differently. No two ecosystems are the same. Conservation stories are all very nuanced, and there's just no better insight into those kinds of things as a filmmaker than actually just speaking to people. And that would be that's the best thing I think I learned doing this, is just picking up the phone, because you're going to learn so much more in a 10-minute call with someone that's right there than researching for 2 days.
Yeah, definitely. I think you've all kind of touched on that, the fact that just getting out there and speaking to people in whatever that form, whether it's via social media, whether it's on the phone, whether it's in person, I think that is a real kind of key takeout from all of that. And then, so just a few more questions, and then we'll go to, I think we've got a couple of questions that people have put in. So Laura, in terms of kind of the impact of telling stories, do you feel that it empowers confidence for local organizations?
Yeah, for sure. I think visual storytelling in general is just such an incredible way to spread a message and to raise awareness about conservation and inspire change in people. So especially like for organizations that are self-funded, that do these kinds of work, is just, like I said before, really good to just have that kind of exposure. And yeah, just, you know, raise awareness about, you know, conservation in general. I think that all really helps. And yeah, films are a great way to do that. And yeah.
Amazing. And then Natalie, do you have any kind of tips in terms of kind of upskilling? Any suggestions of places to volunteer, or like local wildlife trusts or organizations to look out for that you've found more useful than others, or does it differ depending on species or regions, anything like that?
Yeah, it differs everywhere, but I quite often find the smaller organizations are the people that need more help, even if it's just reporting things to monitoring surveys and stuff. Yeah, they're always the people that kind of need more hands-on. The larger organizations always have people kind of knocking at their door asking to help or to volunteer. So yeah, I've always found the smaller organizations are a lot more kind of easier to talk to, and a lot more kind of hands-on in terms of allowing you access or showing you things or sharing information with you. So yeah, I tend to kind of go for the individual that's rescuing seals off a beach. Like it's yeah, I find them more approachable. Yeah. In terms of, I will just also say, just like in terms of if camera is kind of your thing, then just go and film on anything all the time and just learn what your kit does, how to improve, and also make mistakes and own them and learn from them. And yeah, that's just invaluable to just be out filming as much as you can.
Yeah, and it's definitely worth kind of trying to touch base with, because I know a number of the kind of camera companies, they do offer schemes, and they do offer where you can go and take kit out. You don't necessarily have to pay the thousands of pounds and own it yourself. They do offer kind of help towards emerging talent, just to get that experience on their kind of CVs effectively, just to have a chance so that you can put, yes, I've used this Red camera, yes, I've used this. I think that's kind of key as well, to be able to do that.
Yeah, I also befriend other photographers and other camera people. So when there's a piece of kit that I want to try out, if they've got it, then maybe I'll arrange like a little swap on a personal level. So yeah, so that I have access to bits of kit that I want to try, they get them back, it doesn't cost anyone anything. So that's all, you know, making friends with other people that have the same interests and skills as you is invaluable sometimes.
This is my little plug for the Wildscreen network, but that's where our kind of networking events are really useful, because they are a chance to get out and meet different people in the field, whether it's emerging talent or people that have been established in the industry for a number of years. The kind of networking events are a good opportunity to do that and just have those kind of off the record, just easy chats really. And I would say a lot of kind of members and people, it's a very supportive industry. And so you do see there isn't that kind of, the second you'll get to one of those in-person meetings, people just want to chat and they want to help. So it's really kind of useful to have that. And then just one final question for Will, in terms of kind of key skills, what did you learn in terms of kind of researching or shooting during Pete the Pond?
I was going to say something to Natalie. I think being prepared to make plenty of mistakes is definitely something that's going to happen. I've had my fair few blunders, but I think, like Natalie said, a big part of that is asking people that do know. I think everyone in the industry has been in the same position as that at some point in their career. And I've not yet come across anyone that hasn't been happy to help. And yeah, I just also say don't get bogged down in little details and just focus on getting all the basics that you need to tell the story that you want to. I think that's something that I'd probably try to do at the start of me making my first film, was sort of trying to focus on getting the dream shot that I wanted or all that kind of thing. But actually, you know, then you get back in the edit and realize that you miss some quite fundamental things. And I think that sort of, again, highlights why local storytelling is a great place to start out, because you don't want to find that out when you've, you know, been crowdfunding for a year and come back from a trip to the other side of the world. You want to find that out when you're telling local stories at the start of your career, rather than the opposite.
Yeah, no, definitely. All very kind of good. Right, we've got 10 minutes left. So I just want to go to some of the questions that people have asked through. So I'll kind of fire it out to all three of you if you've got any kind of input on this. One, we've had kind of two people come in, similar kind of questions in terms of securing funding for your kind of local films. Have you kind of self-funded these? And they've just kind of mentioned specifically because broadcasters don't necessarily want the kind of hyper-local conservation stories. So the projects that you've worked on, would you, how have you kind of secured funding for these? So if I put that out to all of you.
I quite often self-fund a lot of my stuff. They're local, my costs are generally kind of fuel my time and maybe like my edit sort of suite. So I generally tend to save up and self-fund. However, I see it as an investment in myself. It puts me on platforms like this. It connects me with Wildscreen and other organizations, but also I try and get as much out of it as I can. So stock is also an added bonus. You take care of your footage and keep hold of it, then someone might be interested in the future and pay you for it. Stock isn't a massive earner all the time, but it's a way to kind of reap back a little bit. So yeah, so I try not to think of finance as a barrier. I try and think, you know, I'll take on little jobs that maybe I wouldn't normally do, just to make sure I've got a bit of money to do the things that I want to do, and just 100% see it as me investing in myself, to be able to do the things I want to do in the future.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I also self-funded my project, and what I did was I collaborated with a ecotourism company to help with logistics on location, just because it's a bit remote, like you need boats and stuff like that obviously if you don't have a budget, it's quite difficult. So what I did is I collaborated with them to then deliver a short video for them to promote their services. So it was kind of like an exchange thing. So I did, whilst doing my documentary, I also filmed some of the tourists there and like some, you know, people on the boats, and just got some drone shots for them, some photography as well for them to use after, to then promote their services and stuff. So that's how I found a way to kind of do it on like a no budget kind of thing. But yeah, I do agree with Natalie about also thinking of it as an investment in yourself and in your career and in your show reel and, you know, stock footage and all of that.
Anything to add, Will?
Not a lot. They haven't really said. I was quite fortunate with my film in that it was part of a uni course. So in terms of equipment and stuff, that was all something I didn't have to deal with. But for sure, I think collaborating with people that do have those kinds of resources, and as Laura said, like finding common interests there as a way of, you know, trying to get more out of it for yourself, and also giving something back as well is a good way of working around that. But it's the age-old question, isn't it? How do I pay for it? And it's not easy.
No, definitely not. And then moving on in terms of, so we've had someone ask, how can you ensure the legacy of a local story and the message it aims to spread? So maybe if I go to Will first with that, is there a follow-up to Pete? Is there going to be Pete the Pond 2, Pete Strikes Back? Something like that?
I'm very keen to do more with Pete the Pond. Yeah, I think it depends. It depends what, if you're trying to make impact with a film, I guess it depends on what it is you're trying to achieve. So in the case of Pete the Pond, it's more for me about getting as many people to see his story as possible. So yeah, that's just how I look at it, is how you're trying to, what it is you're trying to achieve with your film.
And Laura, Natalie, anything to add on that one in terms of kind of legacy stories? Are there times that you've been asked to go back to kind of refilm or follow up, or that kind of thing?
I think there's like little tricks you can do on social media, kind of recutting reels, bits and pieces that kind of reinvigorate people's interest in a story and can push people back towards it. So yeah, social media has been amazing for that, but that also sometimes does kind of spark the organizations you've been working with to ask you to come back. So yeah, just little tricks to just keep the conversation going, even if it's a year later and you want to remind people about things. I've always found that quite a useful tool.
Yeah, I think embedding resources in things as well is a useful thing to do. That's certainly something I'm going to try and do more going forward, I think, is making sure that there's other things that support your film, like social media or things that people can do, resources of how to do things. I think that all is a very useful thing to add to your stories.
Yeah, I was going to touch on social media as well for that one. I think it's also a good way to follow up on a story, or, you know, social media is very, very, very powerful tool to getting information out there really for anything. So yeah, definitely with the tapirs, for example, the rescue tapirs, I always try to kind of follow up on how they're doing there. I keep in touch with the organization, and they post things on their Instagram page as well, and I tried sharing them, and like, you know, the tapirs are doing okay, they're like, you know, healthy and all of that. And when they do get reintroduced, then I'll also you know, keep in touch, and then hopefully I would like to go back and kind of do a follow-up on that, but yeah, we'll see.
Definitely. And then in terms, we've had, Matteo's asked, do you think people can get more passionate about a local story than a documentary made in faraway places?
I think yes, if people can see and relate to a thing, then that can really inspire, kind of, yeah, get people passionate and make people excited. If it's something that's right in front of them, I think it's absolutely, it's on the same level as the magical kind of the rest of the world. Yeah, if someone can connect directly with something, I think it's a super powerful thing.
Yeah, I think yeah, like you say, it goes back down to that relatability of local stories and how impactful that can be in engaging people. I think also like local stories can, because they're more relatable, you can gain a lot more from it, whether that be sort of creating a sense of nostalgia in older people about, you know, memories they have of nature when they were younger, or that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I also think like we said before about having contributors in your film that are already just very passionate about a specific topic, like Will did with Pete the Pond as well. I think it often helps kind of translate that, and then it does inspire other people to you know, make their own ponds, or to, you know, go out and care for the nature that's at their doorstep as well, and just develop this emotional bond with with species that they wouldn't normally look at, because they're seeing someone that is so excited about something.
Definitely. So final kind of question, it's a two-pronged question from Richard. So firstly, what's one thing that you can't have whilst you're filming? And then quite a good one to end on, what did you guys learn most from being out in the field filming, and what would you say to someone that is just starting out? So if I go around, I'll start Natalie first. We'll do Natalie, Laura, Will. That's probably.
What was the first question? Sorry.
So the first question was one thing that you can't have with you whilst filming.
Does it mean can't go without?
I would guess yes. That's how I would interpret it. Whether it's like a Yorkshire tea or something.
I'm always thinking about my kit. Like quite often, like my body and my clothes are a mistake. I quite often get covered in water and bits and pieces. So I would advise everyone to think about what they're wearing when they're out in the wild. But the kit I go with, can't go without. I've just got I've got like a little bum bag with like little tool sets and things, just things for releasing tripods and things that I just will not leave the house without. So yeah, like once you learn your equipment and how you want to do things, you suddenly kind of find the things that are like gold to you, like baby leg sticks that are tiny that can get you low to the ground, like they're always in my bag, sort of thing. So yeah, those are kind of, I gather a lot of little things I can't live without, and end up with a massive rucksack and soaking wet. And then yeah, learning about being out in the field, again, yeah, just the environment and learning how to deal with the wet, the cold, the hot, and everything. As someone that was normally kind of in studios or doing other things, sometimes those things can get forgotten about. But yeah, I've learned quite a few lessons about that just recently, especially.
And what would be your kind of one takeout for someone just starting to get into the industry, or just kind of starting out? What would be your one kind of bit of advice that you would give to someone?
Generally it's just go and do it. Just do the thing. Yeah, if you can just spend time just sitting outside, you don't have to have a camera with you, just sit and observe and really kind of take in. It's amazing how intuitive you become to your surroundings. and yeah, kind of go from there. And everyone's passionate about wildlife in these communities, but quite often we forget to just sit and listen, so do that.
Brilliant. And then the same to Laura. Do you want me to redo the questions?
Yeah, so the first question was what I couldn't go without, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't own that much kit yet, but I think just like a very long lens, like a like a 200 to 600, just like get that out. And yeah, just like my drone as well. Like you never know when you're gonna get like, you know, really good place to fly it and just have that bird's eye view. And I think that like what I've learned just doing my film in Brazil, it was my first time actually filming in a very hot country, surprisingly, just because I've been in the UK for the rest of the time. But yeah, problems with overheating, definitely. So definitely a learning process. Filming from a boat was a lot more challenging than I thought, trying to get, because you can't get close to jaguars unless you're in a boat, obviously for safety reasons. And it is it's a lot harder than I thought to get like, you know, that long lens shot on a moving boat. It's tricky, and it's also something that you can just practice and just try and, you know, get that balance right. But yeah, that was something a bit tricky for me. And I think just, you know, tips, like Natalie said, just practice a lot. That was the whole, my filming process was just a big learning process, really. So just being out in the field as much as you can, practicing that manual focus, you know, nailing that, understanding the animal behavior, going several times back to the same place, which is why it's also good to have you know, local stories that you can just go back to and just, you know, track down some wildlife, even if it's something like obvious, or it doesn't matter if it's, you know, a family of rabbits out your door, that you can just kind of study them and like understand how they're, you know, their community is like set up, and you can just predict their behaviors and just practice in that way. I think that's really valuable. And yeah.
Brilliant. And then just quickly, we'll just come to you, Will.
I would say when you're packing your kit, if you think, oh no, I won't need that, I won't take it, because every time you get there and you realize you did need it after all. That would be my top tip for kit. And yeah, I mean, we've all been locked inside for 2 years. So if there's ever a time to get out and experience nature and make other people do the same, then it's now. So
brilliant. That was a very good kind of point to end on. So yeah, so sadly we've come to the end. I just want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon, and a special thanks to Natalie, Laura and Will for their time and their kind of insight and uplifting conversations regarding kind of hope, because I think that is the kind of key takeout from local storytelling. It's accessible, but it's kind of generating that hope that is out there. Just to kind of wrap up, we have one more webinar left in our Emerging Talent series. That is next Thursday at 7 o'clock. And that will be with Ben Cherry, who will be talking about camera assisting and operating. As with all of the Emerging Talent webinars, they will be free. We'll send a link round afterwards for anyone interested in signing up. And then I also just wanted to mention that we also have an Emerging Talent newsletter, which we will send details round to enable you to sign up for that. And then also, if anyone's interested in learning more about the Wildscreen network that I mentioned, we do offer a discounted rate for emerging talent. Again, I'll send around details following on from this. And so that just takes me a kind of final thank you for everyone for joining us. I hope you have a lovely week, and hopefully see you on our webinar next week, if not another one soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Bye everyone.
Bye.